Just so the people understand, F. Lee Bailey was one of the key lawyers in the O.J. Simpson trial. He's the one that cross-examined Mark Fuhrman, destroyed him.
Used the N-word 50 times or whatever.
He just destroyed him in court and probably deserves a lot of the credit for creating the reasonable doubt and the not guilty verdict.
Oh, it was, well, that's another interesting story. The whole OJ thing was I could spend a couple hours talking about the OJ thing.
We have a very special guest with us today, the former Judge Ronald Dresnik. Thank you for coming on the Goldberg and Rosen podcast and taking your time out of your day to spend it with us.
There's nobody I'd rather spend time with than the two of you. And I mean that sincerely. And thank you for inviting me to sit here and
talk some trash.
When you sit here and you see this wood desk in front of you, does it remind you of when you're on the bench and you had that gavel and you used to tell me, denied? Remember that?
I don't think I don't, because I never used the gavel.
Okay.
All right?
Well, you saved it for me.
I never used the gavel unless it was a prop.
Yeah.
I mean, it would sit there, but I used to talk with my eyes. And people would say, they would think they knew what I was thinking. I didn't know what I was thinking, so I don't know how they thought they knew what I was thinking. But
do you remember our first hearing together?
I don't remember our first hearing, but I remember your trial.
Oh, yeah?
I'll never forget that trial.
Was that the Darestein trial?
Yep.
Trial number 3 or 4 in Darestein?
This is the final.
The last one.
All right.
And what, for those of you that don't know about this trial, and it must have been like 30 years ago or more.
It was back in the day.
Back in when you were a kid.
Yeah.
And what amazed me was your client was a big guy, and he was in a car wreck. Remember that, right? He was in a car wreck, and he was driving a truck, and he turned left and got hit by a Mini Cooper. It was a Mini Cooper. And you were suing. You had the balls to sue somebody for that.
Yeah. A little scratch on the car.
Yeah, nothing. No injuries. And he was I think he was heading to take some kind of test.
Physical exam.
All right.
To be a firefighter. Still took it, passed it.
And the damages you won for this guy for his bad back were a story by themselves, but the reason it was so memorable is because this guy, before the accident, had been in the armed forces and he had fallen out of a helicopter.
He remembers this perfectly.
He was injured. He was injured as a result of that helicopter crash, accident, and you got money for him despite all those injuries. My head still marvels at that.
Thanks for giving us a good trial, Judge.
So that was
you had a good saying to me. We were picking the jury, and we had 5 jurors. We needed 6, and there was 2 jurors left, and I had 2 strikes, and I used one, and then there was 1 juror left, and you said to me, if you use that strike, we're gonna have to bring in a new panel. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember this.
I don't remember that.
And usually judges don't weigh their 2 cents. I don't think you're supposed to, but you looked at me and you said, hey, Judd, sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know.
I would have said that.
And I love that sentence. And I said, all right, Judge, I'll keep this guy. And he ended up working out for us.
I guess he did.
Yeah. When you become a legend like you,
right?
You've developed yourself through experiences over time, right? And I think one of the primary experiences that cultivated your personality and who you are was working with F. Lee Bailey.
Well, that's interesting because I didn't hurt it didn't hurt. It was wonderful, but that was like toward the end of my trial. Well, not toward the. I'd say the last third of my career as a trial lawyer, because I have had several careers. I was lucky enough to have a career as a trial lawyer, and then a career as a judge. And now, when I got constitutionally senile and had to retire, I started my third career, which was to go back to being a lawyer, and which is where I currently am, and that's a wonderful experience to have those three careers. But what really did it for me was my early career as a public defender and then as a criminal lawyer, because the office at that time, the public defender's office, the public defender's office was one of these offices. There had great people in this office. I mean, Roy Black was in the office. Jack De Niro was in this office. Philip Hubbard, it was his office. Nobody's listening to this except old people are going to know about these names I'm talking about.
Legends.
They might know Roy Black, but there were great trial lawyers. H.T. Smith started off as an intern he worked for me briefly, but he was an intern for Roy and Jack, and he's teaching. He's a great teacher now.
Great speaker.
And, he's wonderful. But, he learned what he learned back in that office. And Phil Hubbard, who was the boss, his theory was, try the case. Go to trial. Try the case. I mean, and so we, as public defenders, had the ability to just go to trial on everything. And I was lucky enough to get in with a team of lawyers, of like three of us in this courtroom. We were in Judge Paul Baker's courtroom. And on the other side were prosecutors that were there for a long time too. Great lawyers. Eddie O'Donnell. You know Eddie O'Donnell?
Yeah, of course.
You probably know his son, or do you know the original Eddie?
The original.
So Eddie O'Donnell was, he's a fantastic guy. And the thing about Eddie is he was one of these guys that could just, you'd meet him in a bar and he would just start talking to you. And Eddie, you have that same talent, by the way, and he would make friends with everybody. Eddie was just an incredibly good lawyer. Steve Mechanic was like the senior public defender in our group. And then there was Nathan Diamond. So the three of us were these teams where I was the idiot that never tried to talk my client into taking a plea. I never, look, here's the offer. You want it? Take it. I'm not taking that. All right, let's go try.
Let's go, baby.
Let's go.
Made your life easy.
Well, I didn't. I like trying. I didn't know I liked trying cases, but I learned to try cases. And a funny thing happened about that time, which was they changed the rules. And, well, because, as a lawyer, you're operating under rules, and they created this rule which required a preliminary hearing, an adversary preliminary hearing. They didn't have that before. Before that, the state attorney could charge somebody by filing an information, and if the guy was in jail, then he would stay in jail or whatever. And I forget the name of the case that established this, but it established everybody's right after a certain amount of time to have a preliminary hearing. So you'd go in front of a judge. You knew nothing about the case. You weren't supposed to use the preliminary hearing for discovery. It was the state's turn to create probable cause. And for those of you that don't know, probable cause means that to the judge that this guy probably did it.
That's it. That's the.
All right. So, well, it was two things. It was probably this guy, and this guy probably did. Okay, that was what probable cause was. And so we learned quickly that we had the ability to go in blind and start cross-examining and not know anything. And learn a lot of stuff in an adversary preliminary hearing. And you learn how to cross-examine people in an adversary preliminary hearing. Nobody had that ability. You couldn't pay for the education I got as a trial lawyer. And judges, you learn about judges too. Judges are weird. Having been one, I can tell you, because some of my colleagues were pretty weird, and some of them can be pretty dictatorial. Some of them are not too smart. Some of them think they're the smartest thing that ever happened, and they want you to know it. But so anyway,
where do you fall in that line of?
Not too smart.
Come on now.
Not too. You know why I'm not too smart? Because there were smart ones, but I had that same attitude when I became a judge, which was, you want to try the case? Try the case.
And that's what we liked.
That's what my feeling was. Try the case. There's an offer. I have nothing to do with the offer.
Yeah.
You want to try the case? Try the case. I love trying cases.
Yeah.
So, and it's not my case, it's your case. And
you had me sit a jury one time because I told you I wanted to try the case, and it turns out the defense hadn't even given me their expert reports. You said, you asked for a trial, you're getting a trial. We're bringing in a jury right now. And I didn't even have the defense's expert reports. You remember that one?
No.
Yeah, you made me do that.
Well, that's it. I mean,
it worked out.
You want to do it?
Let's go.
I'm there.
Yep.
And it didn't bother me. And people start talking about, you're wasting your time. It's not my time. I'm getting a salary. I'm getting a salary. And by the way, my caseload was one of the lowest caseloads around. I think the lawyers knew I was going to try cases. And you want to resolve it, resolve it. We're going, the trial date is such and such. If the plaintiff wanted a continuance, because I always thought it was the plaintiff's case.
Yeah.
That was my approach to cases. So if the plaintiff wanted to proceed, well, and the defense had a good reason for a continuance, okay, I'll give you a continuance. Okay, second time, oh, you want another continuance. All right, what's your reason? All right. I mean, I'm not a hard ass, but all right. Yeah. Hey, this is the third time, come on. This guy's spending a lot of money, it's a lot of time. Client's in pain. Whatever, let's resolve it. Settle it or try it.
Yeah.
So that's what formed it. It wasn't being a judge, and then by the time I got to answer your question, by the time the last part of that was I got into the partnership with F. Lee Bailey, which was an interesting story. You want to hear that?
Yeah,
of course.
All right. So I told you Paul Baker was the courtroom I was in.
And just so the people understand, F. Lee Bailey was one of the key lawyers in the O.J. Simpson trial. He's the one that cross-examined Mark Fuhrman, destroyed him.
Used the N-word 50 times or whatever.
He just destroyed him in court, and probably deserves a lot of the credit for creating the reasonable doubt and the not guilty verdict.
Oh, it was, well, that's another interesting story. The whole O.J. thing was I could spend a couple hours talking about the O.J. thing because Bailey was in California at the time, and I was talking to him often. I would be talking to him on the phone, and I'd see him on television getting interviewed on the steps with a phone in his hand. Well, he was talking to me, and then I was I became one of the talking heads on Channel 10, I think it was, because that show, the the O.J. trial occupied America's attention 100%.
100%.
Our dad, every single day, would come home from school and he would just be glued to the TV.
Yeah, everybody was. It was just, that was. So anyway, F. Lee Bailey was the original legend. Well, there were a couple of legends at that time, but so being partners with F. Lee Bailey was I think the partnership was about 10 years. And I've tried a couple of long cases. I was in a trial with him, he and I, in a 1-month trial. And because of that partnership, maybe, or otherwise, I used to have the ability to travel around the country. I tried cases, I don't want to say in every state, but I tried cases in state of Washington. I had several cases in Washington, New York City, Alabama, Georgia. I'm trying to remember where else I had trials, but I had. And so you see a lot of judges from different places. And so you, as a trial lawyer, you learn a lot about judges and what you can do and can't do and should do, shouldn't do, which occupied that last 25,
Did he get along with judges? Lee?
I got along. Oh, Lee?
Yeah.
They loved him.
They loved him.
Loved him. Well, not all.
Yeah.
I remember one case we had up in Broward County. We go up there, and I remember the magistrate. I'm not going to mention her name, but we go into this hearing, and it was not a trial. It was just a hearing, and whatever it was, we got our ass handed to us. And we walk out, and he says, "She really likes me." It was, okay. So, no, I didn't think so. So people have some funny feelings about themselves too. She really likes me. I don't know.
What in your criminal defense part of your career did you learn the most that helped you when you became a judge?
When I was in law school, I dropped out my last year or my first year of law school, and I had nothing to do. And so I went to work for a criminal lawyer in Hollywood, where I grew up, a famous guy. His name is Joe Varon. Joe Varon was a real legend. My life has been a very lucky life. I have had the ability in my life to be around the most significant, important legends. F. Lee Bailey, Richard Gerstein. I'm mentioning names that people, unless they're older, aren't going to know. But these are names everybody should know.
His name's on the building.
His name is. They named the building after the criminal justice building, the Richard E. Gerstein building. Richard Gerstein was a state attorney in Dade County for 20-something years. At that time, the longest elected officer in the state of Florida. Janet Reno became his first assistant, and then, these are more recent names that people may remember. And so Janet Reno, you may remember, is somebody that became the Attorney General of the United States. She was maybe the first woman appointed as the Attorney General of the United States. But she worked for Richard, and Steve Mechanic was a public defender. And I don't know what Steve had, or what magic Steve had, but he had a certain magic in that building. He used to drive this big Cadillac. And he had his own reserved parking spot in the bottom of the building, in the basement. I don't know how that happened.
Crafty guy.
So Steve Steve never went to trial. He didn't want to ruin his relationship with the judges. So if it was a trial, it was going to happen. It was me.
That was you.
You know, so, hey, Dresnik, you know, you're going to try this case. Okay. So, because Steve wasn't going to get his hands dirty, and he didn't want to ruin his situation. Steve, so it worked fine for me.
Yeah. I mean, just think, I was telling you, like, you had the scales of justice, right? And on one, let's call it one half of your career, you were serving on the bench, and then the other half, you're representing drug dealers. How do you make those two mix?
Easy. I'm gonna let me finish this one before I get to that one.
Go ahead.
So Paul Baker was the courtroom I was in, and then I left the public defender's office, but I maintained a relationship with Baker, and then Baker got pancreatic cancer, and when he got, and it was really sad. I mean, Paul had many wives and a lot of kids, and no money. So being the guy I was, I decided, let me see what I can do about raising some money for Paul Baker and his family. And I did what I did, tried to organize, and we actually raised a lot of money for him. One of the people that I went to hit and to get involved in what I was doing was Richard Gerstein, who didn't know me from Adam's house cat. He just didn't know me. But he got to know me because of what I did for Paul Baker. And that's how and my law office at the time, because I'd left the public defender's office, was in the Concord building. And when Richard Gerstein left the state attorney's office, he went to work for Murray Sams Anderson, and their office was in the Concord building. I was on the 7th floor, he was on the 8th floor. So before that, I started the Paul Baker thing. I'd see him in the elevator. He didn't know me. Now he knows me. We're riding up and down the elevator. I remember one time, and we used to eat lunch downstairs, and they had the best restaurant in the world down there called Sally Russell's. I don't know if you remember.
Everybody knew Sally Russell's, yeah.
That
was the
best
spot.
Hamburgers in Miami.
Yeah.
And it was a place where all the lawyers that would try cases across the street in the courthouse, when they're waiting for a verdict, would go to the bar. Great bar in Sally Russell's. Best Bloody Marys.
Only when they're waiting for a verdict, right? Never during the trial.
So that was my universe,
Yep.
right? Sally Russell's, the courthouse across the street, and the criminal courthouse, and knowing Richard, but not well, but he knew me. And one day I'm sitting at a table in Sally Russell's, and he's sitting there with F. Lee Bailey. And they're talking about a case, and they're talking about picking a jury. And I finally met the Mr. F. Lee Bailey. And I'd seen him. I'd gone to a lecture somewhere at the DuPont Plaza Hotel. You remember when that was a hotel?
Yep.
You know, it's now Zuma, but back then, and I remember a lecture he gave, and I was like enthralled. I couldn't believe, seeing F. Lee Bailey. So anyway, I'm on my own practicing criminal law. I had a lot of cases, and to answer your question, Brett, about drug cases and this, back then, which was in the late 70s, early 80s, the drug practice in Miami was like the center for the drug practice, but it wasn't the drug practice that you're thinking of. It was the marijuana practice.
So this is before the cocaine
This
cowboys.
is before the cocaine cowboys. And the marijuana business, or people that were doing the marijuana, were very interesting characters. And I was telling your brother before that it reminded me of modern day pirates, but not in a bad way. But they were people they were Keys people, you know, conks, and they could ride boats, and they knew the waters around South Florida. They knew the Everglades like the back of their hand, and they could get a boat in there in one of those islands, and it'd be loaded with bales of pot, and they would, you know. So one of my very first cases, when I left the public defender's office, I get it. Well, two of my first ones. One case, I represented a guy that had to have a public defender, and I beat his case. And when I got out in private practice, some guy comes to see me, and he says, "Hey, I want you to represent me." You know, so it turns out this guy was a Peruvian, but he wasn't a marijuana guy. He was a cocaine guy. So that was like an early connection I had to. You know, too bad about him, because he went from being a very nice, productive guy, and I think he started hitting on his product a little too much, and then that was before they had crack, and then he started with the crack, and then he went to hell, and you know, I remember flying to Peru to see him, and seeing the life in Peru, which scared the shit out of me. I mean, it was I couldn't wait to get on that plane and get out of there. It was a very scary experience. And I met some other great lawyers that represented these drug people. But so my early days were representing these marijuana smugglers, and there were a group of them, and they ended up making me their lawyer, and so one of the cases I had in the state of Washington was for one of those marijuana guys, another one in Louisiana, and they paid well, and
that's before you had to determine whether or not the money you were receiving was drug money,
that
right?
was interesting, because I always had this feeling, I said, you know, they didn't have that at that time. I was thinking to myself, this is a really strange world. It's very strange. This guy is a smuggler. He's made millions of dollars, you know, getting paid with, you know, bags of money. And, but I'm going to court representing him, and I'm getting paid, and everybody knows it. I'm almost like this guy's partner. You know, they didn't have the forfeiture. Nobody got smart about enough to do that. And then that started, and that really put a chill in the business, and it kind of scared me. But anyway, I had decided I didn't want to, you know, I was by myself. I was my own, and I wanted to get into a firm. And one day my insurance guy says, and I told him, I said, you know, I'm tired of this being alone. He said, well, I heard that Richard Gerstein, upstairs, is leaving Murray Sam's office, and he wants to start a practice. So I went upstairs, you know, and saw him. He knew who I was because of my relationship with finding the, you know, doing what I was doing for Paul Baker's kids. And he said, let me think about it. So I got a call a week later or so. He said, come back up. He said, okay, we're going to form a partnership, move our office up to Bay Point, the Bay Point area. And one thing I want you to know, there's another person that's going to be a partner in this firm, but I can't tell you who. I said, you can't tell me who my partner's going to be? And I said, well, I could call him Richard by then instead of Mr. Gerstein. I said, well, if he's good enough for you, he's good enough for me. And then the partnership gets formed, blah, blah, blah. And he says, by the way, your partner's F. Lee Bailey.
You're so happy. Huh?
I mean, that's the way that happened.
He had some enemies, though, didn't he, Bailey? Because I was always told that there's an island in the Bahamas, Great Harbor Island, where he had a house or a palace or something like that. And he made some enemies and they burned it down. Is that a true story?
I never heard that story before, but he did have some enemies. But The enemies that I know about happened later in his career, and they were lawyers.
Really?
And some lawyers here, because they didn't. I could never figure out why they hated him the way they hated him, and why they hated him. But everybody knows about. Well, not everybody, because people watching this are too young to know about it. But there were people that either thought he was stealing clients from them or stuff, and then he had his personal problems with
The bar?
with the bar because of a case that he had where he thought he had a deal with the government, and
We get it. Let me ask you this. As a trial lawyer, you study other trial lawyers and learn, a little thing here, a little thing there. From you studying Lee Bailey, we saw him cross-examine Mark Fuhrman. We know he's a gifted cross-examiner. Was that his best skill set? And if it was, what about his cross-examination techniques made him so effective?
I think his best skill set was that he was such a quick study. I think it's the word I was looking for. I mean, he could look at a case and instantly see the entire architecture of the case, immediately. Bailey never took a single note. And I'd be sitting there taking notes. He said, why are you doing that? I said, what do you mean, why am I doing that? He said, that's a crutch. He says,
keep it right here.
And then he would tell me stories about, his, I mean, he had, it was rumored that he had a photographic memory. I don't know if he did or not, but he did. He was good, but he didn't take it down, and it was real.
So he wouldn't even have an outline as to which angle he was going to go?
He would read he'd read it. He'd sit there. He knew about it. He knew the case. Did not take a note.
Wow.
And that's a great practice for lawyers to do. When I have stopped essentially writing, and so I just listen. And I've always had a pretty good memory, and I remember weird facts. That I can just, I didn't know what they were going to ask me. I'm just pulling this shit up.
Yeah.
And it is a crutch. And if you learn to rely on what you're hearing and seeing, it's the same thing the jury's hearing and seeing. Some of them are sitting there taking notes like crazy. They're not paying attention. What do you see? What do you see when you're looking? If you're in the jury, when I was a judge and I'm sitting in the jury box, I'm watching people. I'm not taking notes. Well, sometimes I did, but I'm watching them. And the first day I was a judge, I realized you could tell when somebody's lying when you don't have a dog in that fight. What do I care? I'm just watching.
Yep.
It's a great point. Credibility is going to win or lose your case. And the biggest fear that we have is putting a plaintiff on and they lose their credibility, or for us as lawyers to lose our credibility in front of a jury.
As a judge, when I would sit there, or even in an argument with a lawyer, and I always tell this to people that ask, I wish they'd ask me more in my firm, but they don't realize what a treasure they have there. But I would listen to a lawyer or anybody testify, and as soon as they lied, that was it. They were done.
Yep.
It was over. Nothing else mattered at that point. The first lie.
It's a good rule for relationships.
How to live your life.
Yep.
Well, you can live with lies. I live with lies all the time. We all live with lies. But when somebody is telling you a lie, I mean, just flat out lying to, when they want something from you. Or a lawyer, It's everything. I think everything depends on credibility and the ability to relate in the moment. That's the other benefit.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know how long you want to talk for.
This is
not
great.
joking.
That was great, man. You are so on fire today, Judge. You really are, sharing so much knowledge with us.
Talk to us about your time on the bench. Like maybe there's the most memorable trial other than Judge trial, of course. But maybe there was an experience that you'd like to talk about with us.
That's a tough question for me because I had such great trials because I tried cases. I had a lot of noteworthy trials because, like I remember I had one of the first gavel television trials. I couldn't even remember what it was. I think it had to do with a cop that did something. I can't think of a memorable, that one trial was more important than another. I remember sometimes instances that happened in trials, but I think more remember situations where, not as a judge, but more likely as a lawyer, like I've given you some. But what I've told you, though, about credibility and how when I saw somebody lie, and be it a lawyer, if it's a lawyer and gave me a bullshit story, it was, forget it. Don't bother saying anything else.
You used to call them out. And you used to have your motion calendar open court, and you'd call people out if you felt that they weren't being honest with you. You weren't shy about it, even if they were your friends. You were very to the point. You were respectful, but you really judged people by their word and their presentation to you.
Yeah, their word is everything to me.
Yeah.
Everybody's word is, that's what matters to me. And it doesn't, there's not much else.
You were good to your staff. You had a nice relationship with your staff.
I love my staff. When I was in the criminal court, which was my second assignment, my first assignment, they put me in, I remember, okay, I'm a judge. So I go see Joe Farina, who was the chief judge, and he says, "Congratulations, you're a judge. I'm putting you in family court." Family court. I had done one divorce in my life. I don't know shit about family law. Don't let them see you sweat. So luckily I had I forget what they called them at the time. Maybe it was a case manager or something who knew what she was doing. So she'd sit at one end of the table, I sit at the other, and listen to stuff, and I'd look at her, and I'd get a
little.
So pretty soon, and Farina told me, he said, "You're going to be there for 6 months." Well, after about 3 or 4 months, I was like really liking it. I started really liking family law.
It was like a soap opera.
It was fun.
It's a soap.
I mean, it was real. It was people's lives and stuff, and it was criminal. As a judge, I found criminal law to be very easy, and then it got to be boring. Family law was pretty easy because there aren't that many issues. Like civil law, what you guys do, and what I did at the end, is infinitely interesting because nothing is the same ever. The other two areas, there's like 9 areas in criminal law. In family law, there's maybe 15 areas that you got to learn.
Yeah.
But in civil, it's amazing. So I got bored being a criminal judge. I used to watch these state attorneys come in and they make, or a defense lawyer come in and make an argument to me. And I invented the frickin' argument. I know that argument. I've done that argument before 100 times. And I would say, that's an interesting argument, but you should have said, and it was always the same. And so I actually got boring. I said, how can you get boring in criminal law? It's also interesting. It ain't interesting. It's same thing. Every case is the same. It's just a different face.
So you have this successful criminal defense practice with legends. Why become a judge?
Honest answer is I got frightened. The money issue that you raised before was an issue. Where am I getting this money? You know, where's the money coming from? Am I going to get to keep it? You know, I'm getting paid in cash. You know, where's my next case going to come from? I got scared, and I said, you know, look, I've done this for a while. I've made some money. I'd like to be a judge. I always wanted to be a judge. And in fact, I always wanted to be a federal judge. I never made that. And I realized at the time I was a judge, there ain't nothing else. I mean, how do you advance from being a judge? Well, you can go to the appellate court, but I like people.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, my uncle, my father's best friend, had a candy shop on the boardwalk in Wildwood, New Jersey. So I would be behind the counter selling to people that came into the candy shop. A lot of people. I love that you know, the interaction. And as a judge, I used to love, you know, I love my motion calendars. I love lawyers coming in. I love lawyers, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, judges hate lawyers. You ever notice that? Everybody that does something ends up hating what it is they're doing. I think waiters hate their customers. Barbers must hate the people that they cut, whose hair they cut. Appellate judges hate trial judges. Judges hate lawyers. You know,
People forget where they came from.
yeah, and they don't like them.
Yeah, because they forgot where they came from. They forgot that they were there.
I think it also has to deal with perspective, right?
I love lawyers, really. You know, and I love watching lawyers work. And I like watching them do what they do well. You know, so I had fun. And you know what? People came in my courtroom. It was fun. It wasn't.
It was always
It wasn't you didn't.
an experience.
You weren't going to get shouted out or anything. You know, unless you really were.
You earned it.
Up.
Unless somebody earned it.
Well, I remember when you first came in, I scared the shit out of you. That was a joke, though.
Oh, well. I didn't know it.
No, you didn't.
Thanks for filling me in on it now. No, I always had a great time in front of you, except for that first time.
Taking this now to the final chapter, stage 3. You are now taking all that experience, judge experience, criminal defense lawyer experience, and have a very successful arbitration, mediation practice, and high-level civil trial practice. What's it like now being a private judge, being a private mediator, and you don't have the robe, right? People don't have to listen to you. You don't, unless it's an arbitration, but you know, it's a little bit different, and you have to transition into private practice. How's that going?
Well, transitioning back into private practice was interesting because I remember like my first few days, well, my first month maybe back at where I'm working now. And I remember sitting in on a phone call with Bruce Katzen was talking to a client, and I was listening to the conversation, and when he hung up, I said, now I remember why I wanted to be a judge, and that is, I forgot what assholes some clients can be.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to deal with people like that. You know, I'd like to be able to choose. In my career as a trial lawyer, if I didn't like you, I didn't want to take the case. You know, I had to like somebody. If I didn't like him, I don't like working for him.
there's an emotional connection between the lawyer and the client, and they have to be on the same page, no matter what the case is worth.
Yeah.
You really do.
Yeah. So,
And they'll get a more effective lawyer as well. You know, when we have situations where you feel like you don't have a great relationship with your client and the client's fighting you and you're trying to defend yourself with that client, there's only so much energy you have, right? So if a lot of your energy is dealing with a dissatisfied client, how are you going to really represent them the right way against insurance companies for us?
It's hard. And they, you know, I have found, you know, it isn't the way you just asked the question, Judd. It's like, you know, as I'm first of all, I'm not doing litigation anymore. I used to have this fantasy when I left the bench, and the fantasy was I loved trial work so much I was going to be a trial lawyer until they put me in a box. But that fantasy passed about 5 years ago when I realized it's a young man's game, and I'm just not a young man anymore. So I don't want to fool myself or a potential client. It's just I don't have it anymore to be a trial lawyer. In terms of mediation and arbitration is like being a judge. I love arbitration. I really enjoy it. And mediation is difficult for me because I see what ought to happen very easily. I can, I can see what should happen. And if, as a trial lawyer, as a criminal lawyer, there's nothing, and you know this very well, there's nothing like winning a case in front of a jury.
Nothing.
I mean, you can take whatever drugs you want, you can get as high as you want on whatever. Nothing makes you more high than winning a case in front of a jury.
Yeah.
All right, that's it.
Willie Gary told us he'd rather try a case than even eat. He don't want to eat food. He just wants to try cases. And he showed it when we tried a case with him. He's just,
I remember
all over it.
My very first case as a criminal lawyer, I was working some civil firm in Hollywood. And Joe Barron, my hero, had called me up and he said, listen, you want to try? I got a case for you. You want to try? I said, yeah, sure. I worked in a civil firm. I didn't even tell them. He said, okay, meet your client. It was in Dania. He says, your client will be waiting for you out front of the courthouse in Dania. I said, I never met the guy. He said, go try the case. So I go out there and I see some guy walking around. I said, you so-and-so? Yeah. So I walked into the courtroom and I didn't know anything about it. So I'm listening to the trial. It was, just a judge. And then the testimony ended. Judge said, you have anything? I said, yeah, I move for a directed verdict. He said, granted.
Pretty good win.
Granted. Boom. I said, let's go. And it was like, I was like a helium balloon, like on a string. And I went and I floated into the office the next day. I was floating for a while. I floated in. I said, listen, I want to do criminal work. They said, criminal work? Not here, you don't. And that's when I left and went to the public defender's office in Dade County. I called Phil Hubbard, and I got that job. But that experience of winning is just incredible. As a mediator, I would see what should happen because I'd listen to the case. I know both sides. I know what ought to happen. And when the case settled and people were throwing their arm around you and say, great job, great job. So, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
What the fuck did I do? Nothing. I didn't do anything. People just decided that was the right thing to do. They settled. They should have. And when it didn't settle, I felt like I'd just lost the case. So I never really got a lot of internal satisfaction.
So I guess we'll end it with this. And I think this is so special about you. We talked about your career, and we understand everything that you've done to be Judge Dresnik, the people that the Dade County people know. But you also have a very happy existence outside of this country on a little island in Europe. Where do you like to go?
Capri. Although, I got to tell you, this last trip we took, I've been going to Capri probably for 10, 15 years to Capri. Maybe it was just the place we were staying in Capri that made it so special, because we stayed at a different place this time. And the experience this time wasn't as great as it's been. And I'm beginning to think it's time to find another place to go. We did end up going the second half of the summer to the French Riviera and to Saint-Tropez. And we stayed at an incredible place. And next trip may be not Capri. So but I do love Capri.
You're going to go from Italian wine to French wine.
Yeah.
I've gone from wine to vodka.
That's pretty exciting. That I think we can learn from you that if you pay attention to what's going on in life, there's always another chapter to explore.
There is. But, I listened to a very interesting, fun podcast recently. It was on Barry Weiss interviewed Woody Allen, who just finished writing his first novel. He had done 50 movies. I wish I could remember the line it is, but I'm going to give you the essence of it, but it was just so great. And she asked a question like you just asked me, you did 50 movies, you're doing this, you're doing that. He said, what's the secret? And he said, nothing. He said, there's nothing great about getting older. There's nothing wonderful. You just do what you do and just keep doing it. When I had cancer, and people started saying, "Oh, you're a survivor," and they pump you up with all this bullshit. You're not a survivor. There's nothing special about surviving cancer except you're lucky. And what do? It's just one foot in front of another. You just keep moving. And
live in the present.
Look.
Well, thanks for your time, Judge.
Thank you for asking all these great questions. You were making me remember stuff and going back.
Love it.
This was awesome. I really appreciate it.